Hello, this is Ryan Kingslien. So in this quick tip I want to show you how I pose models using these kind of intermediate maquette models that I have here. Let's take a look at just the female one. What I've done is gone in and placed topology in places that is going to make the topological masking really easy to get to. So just click and drag for the wrist, click and drag for the elbow, for the knee, for the foot, isolate the hips, isolate the rib cage, and the neck. So all these places are really easy for me to get in there and quickly isolate so that I can spend all of my time thinking about the pose, getting up, checking the pose in the mirror, and working from that direction. Now let me show you a few maquettes that I've created. These were actually done with a different model. An earlier version that after this experience I changed the model that I have. So here's one, another, more. Each one of these is done in a matter of say 15 to 20 minutes using just that base mesh. So let's go back to the here we go. To the male, and let's make sure we've got the female right there. Okay, so we've got our female and our male, and now we want to take a look at how we can pose these and some of the things that we need to be mindful of when we're posing. Before I start getting into the actual posing of it, let me show you how I go in and sketch these things in a way that's just very free-flowing and but structural. So first thing, I'm going to create another layer so they're off of the layer, and I'm just using inside of Photoshop the brush at a very low level. Nothing special about the alpha. And when I sketch a figure, I am always thinking about the different structures that we have to work with. So there is always the rib cage, the hip, and the head. And I'm going to just keep this very loose because I prefer loose a lot of times. So rib cage, hips, and then just the limbs, so the legs, the arm, all of that stuff. Move the head up. So let's delete all of that, and let's just do a couple of really quick sketches. So I keep it really small, making sure I get all three in place, making sure that I get there an angle to the limbs. So I don't want to just draw the limbs as a straight line, but I want to say get the gesture of the thigh, get the calf coming in, what's happening with the arm, and then the forearm and how that's moving off to the side. Make sure that I'm keeping this stuff all in motion, and I have a sense of where I'm going. So wind's blowing a dress this way maybe while the person's moving forward. Let's move them back, put their feet underneath them a little bit more. Just keep it pretty loose and pretty dirty. So what is it that we want to pose today? So let's say it's two figures, male and female. There's going to be heroic figures, which our model is based off of 8-head heroic figure anyways. And we want them to both be with one arm up, symbolizing hope. So let's see. Let's play with a few ideas there. Okay, going to put their weight on that leg between them, always checking proportions, and let's get this leg off to the side. Something to establish some kind of triangle here. and then this arm coming off into the distance there. So that overall what I'm working with is moving towards a triangular shape. And they're both holding something here, a torch or a sword or some kind of shape. So let's say, we have a basic idea of where we want to go with this. Let's get ourselves into ZBrush and see what we can do. First thing I'm going to do is make one the subtool of the other. I'm going to rename that because that got renamed for some reason. Should be female. Okay, and now we are going to go into Move, draw out an action line, and I'm going to turn symmetry off so that I don't do that. And move the female off to one side. Might go into the male, move him off to the other side as well. Now when I do this, it's wise to also turn local symmetry on, so that you're working within the symmetry of within the axes of the individual subtool, as opposed to both subtools together. So you'll see now if I go back into Draw and I turn symmetry on, you can see the symmetry for the male is just completely wrong, but as soon as I turn local symmetry on, we're back in business. So I can turn that back on, but let's see. Do I want to work with symmetry? Yeah. Alright, so now I'm going to go into Rotate, Control, and let's turn the female off for a second. And one of the first things that I do is start to align the rib cage, the hip, and the head. So I'm going to draw out an action line along the back, move it in slightly, and then from here in Rotate I can click the center one. Oops, let's turn symmetry off. To rotate it around, I can pivot it from either end here. Let me just blur that a touch. And now what's important to note about posing a figure is that the end points and the positioning of the top and the bottom is very important to getting the results that you want. So for example, with the ribs, where are the ribs going to start their rotation? Are they going to start it somewhere up here with the beginning of the cervical vertebrae, at the top of the lumbar vertebrae? Let's see what happens if we do that. We get some results we can kind of live with. One thing I like about doing it this way is that I can also push the rib forward slightly, depress it slightly. But what I really want to avoid us getting into is the thinking where we have to position it exactly correct from an anatomical perspective. You don't have to do that, because at the end of the day, if I want to say put his rib cage up slightly and down slightly, see, I'm not getting the right rotation there, but I might go a little bit and then switch into Move and just move it back. I know it's cheating, but we have undos and all other kinds of cheating ways, so let's get used to it. Alright, now let's get this guy posed. Let's figure out what we're going to do. First thing, I'm really going to rotate him. See, the female is on his left, our right, so he's going to be, the whole character actually is going to be rotated slightly like that. And then his chest is going to be rotated towards the female. We continue with the neck. And there we go. So now we've got the slight rotation that we want in there. Now for this arm, I'm going to cast this arm back. So I actually sketch out or place the action line where the clavicle is, and I will just click on that and rotate that back, being careful of the compression there. Maybe blur that a little bit more. So this arm's really getting pushed back. Now, this is a problem, but you have to decide for yourself how much you want to deal with posing it correctly and getting these masks correctly from the beginning, or how much you want to actually just allow it to be resculpted later. So, in this case, I'm going to allow that to be resculpted later. So, I've pushed that arm back. Now I'm going to tilt it up. Control, click and drag. I kind of place that where the humerus is. This is, I don't do that all the time. And then just kind of move that up and back slightly. Just checking the motion. Okay, and I've got to rotate this forearm because he's not going to just move his arm back like that. He's going to rotate his hand backwards so that there's a nice gesture to this whole arm moving. So when I want to rotate the forearm, there's a couple of ways I can do this. If I'm working on a more refined model, I'll be a little bit more careful. So let me first do that approach. Also, I'm going to turn local on. So the last place I select is the pivot. Okay. Now, see if I've masked off his wrist and I go in here and I just start doing that, then it's going to completely ruin what's happening up here at the top. But if you look at your own forearm and where it starts to rotate, what on the surface of your forearm moves the most as you rotate your forearm, you'll see that it's really only the last third of your forearm. Really only this area right here that actually gets all of that motion. So I can get away with just doing something like this. But be careful. See how it's flattening out like that? It's not really what we want to have happening. So let's see if we can't, I mean it is very flat, but let's see if we can't do it a little bit better. Okay, I like to draw out from the elbow, move it into the inside slightly. Sometimes I'll do it in stages. I'll let the skin move a little bit from there, and then I'll move that a bit. And this I think needs to get moved a bit. And then I'll look at my own arm as I rotate my own arm, and I'll see that there's a certain point, basically about right when the palm is facing directly down, that in order to continue rotating it, I can feel that my whole arm starts to actually rotate. So these are things to be mindful of in the maquette. That the whole arm is going to start to rotate and start to get that palm facing backwards. About like that. So that at the end of the day, the bicep itself is almost facing directly down. Now this I would consider perfectly acceptable from my maquette. I may want to go in and bend his elbow a touch. And for bending his elbow, I'm just going to make an action line be a lever. Then I'm also going to bend his wrist, and again an action line, dragging it out into open space. But let's move it up. And we may want to go in, withdraw, and just kind of move some things around. But you have to remember that you are working with a maquette, so there's only so much that you want to do. You'll have to spend a lot more time messing with this when it gets into the final sculpt phase, and you start posing that. So no need to start adding a bunch of things to your plate right now. So I'm just inflating, and I'm just switching some polygons around. Okay. And now I'm going to raise this arm, rotate, control click, and raising an arm is actually not as easy as it might seem. You might think, okay, let's just place a little lever in there where the humerus is coming in and inserting in the shoulder joint. So let's just see what happens there. Okay, yeah, not really acceptable, but maybe we can cheat. And yeah, you can kind of cheat. But let me show you one way that I do it. That seems to minimize some of the need for cheating. And so the first thing that I do is I'll take the arm as it is and I just raise it straight up. So in this case, I'll just take it like this. Oops, that's going to rotate. And just move it straight up. I may benefit by putting that action line a little bit deeper. Okay, so there. Arm is straight up. Now what I really want to do is get that arm pointing all the way up, but if we were to do it on ourselves, take our arm and point it all the way up, you'll see that, you know, it doesn't really work that well. It starts to really stress a lot of things. What you really need to be doing is starting to rotate your palm and rotate the arm itself before it starts lifting up here. That's a painful thing for us to do in real life. So what I'm going to do now, change my position, look at it from a top view, draw out my action line, and now that I've moved it here, I'm going to move it this way. This is going to get some of that rotation that I'll need to have happen. I'm not going to worry about all of this because there's going to be enough resculpting to go around. Now, I can go in and mask off a touch more of this, and then just move his arm up. And so now at this point, as you raise your arm up, everything kind of moves up. So I'm just going to move that up a touch and get into the resculpting phase. So one thing I know right off the bat is that this deltoid muscle, which right now is kind of pulling around back here, is going to actually not pull around that much, and it's going to be much elevated. Okay, so let's make a mask. I'm going to say lasso, and I just want to mask off that neck area. So I leave that alone. But all of this needs to get moved up. And let's move this up, pull the pectoral muscle up because it's going to be stretching upwards now. Maybe smooth out some of this stuff that's happening right in here, getting a touch bit in terms of the compression. But be careful. I'm going to go back in and inflate some of that. And be mindful, you know, this is your maquette. So intersecting polygons are not going to be that big of an issue because what we are trying to do, what we want to do, is get our sense of the form and sense of motion as fast as possible so that we can kind of see if we like the pose, if everything's going well. So let's see. I'm going to move that up a bit more. Let's see from the back. Definitely more from the back. Alright, let's get a little more rotation in that forearm. I'll be looking at the back of the hand there. And then one thing I'd like to do eventually with hands, because I'm keeping it very simple, is I like to actually just smooth them down. And then I'll go in with inflate and just inflate out, you know, some kind of shape that I'll ultimately use. Okay. So now I've got his upper body largely posed. Let's get him some neck movement in here. So I'm going to use levers. And I'm also going to lower this a touch. Alright. So there we are on the upper body, getting that in the most basic way posed. But we have to really work on this lower body. So what I might do now is I'm going to say draw out, you know, basics of the bone there. I'm going to rotate that down so it's a nice straight line from there. And make sure perspective is on, yes. Let's turn it off for a second and just establish a ground plane. And also establish where the pit of the neck is in relationship to that knee, or to the ankle. So pit of the neck right there, and say that's about good. Okay, look at that from a side view. See how fast it is to just quickly establish those. And then let's mask that off. I'm going to move this knee forward. Actually, let's just place it right there. Is perspective on? Yes. Okay, what happened? Let's just say move that down a touch. And move that out. Oh yeah, that's where I lost it. Okay, about like that. But we need to rotate this as well. Not rotate it in, but rotate it out. And then let's make sure that we're okay there. Okay, turn our perspective on, and we're starting to have a nice heroic pose as this person holds aloft this object. So let's bend at the elbow a touch. Perspective is on. We can go in and say establish a ground plane, select a plane 3D, make that a poly mesh. Go back into our pose, append that new polymesh plane, and what I usually do is go into preview, and I just press shift to lock it to that, and say store. So it's easier than using, it's just a fast way of doing it. Let me say it that way. Voila. So now we've got a pretty static, pretty set ground plane for us to work on, and for us to make sure that everything is intersecting it correctly. And switch into move, and there we go. Alright, so that's the first part of posing our character, and it gives you a quick sense of how I might use this maquette and use transpose to very quickly establish a shape, some kind of position that I like.